The sharp crack of thunder against the New Mexico sky woke Ethan Ashford from dreams he could never quite remember, and he lay still in his narrow bed for a long moment, listening to rain hammer against the tin roof of his ranch house like the devil himself was knocking. It was April of 1882, and the drought that had gripped the territory for 3 months had finally broken, turning the dusty roads of San Elizario into rivers of mud and making every building in town leak somewhere. Ethan rose from bed, pulled on his trousers and boots, and grabbed his hat and oilskin coat before heading out into the deluge. His cattle would be restless in weather like this, and he had learned long ago that a rancher's work never truly ended, rain or shine. The walk from his small ranch on the outskirts of town to the center of San Elizario took him 20 minutes in good weather, but tonight it took nearly 40 as he slogged through ankle-deep mud and fought against wind that tried to tear his hat from his head. At 32 years old, Ethan had been working this land since he was 15, first as a ranch hand for old Samuel Morrison, then buying his own spread when Morrison died and left him a small inheritance. The town knew him as a hard worker, honest to a fault, and so solitary that most folks had given up trying to introduce him to eligible women. His ranch hands joked that he was married to his cattle, and Ethan never bothered to argue. As he passed the small whitewashed church at the edge of the main street, something made him pause. The door stood slightly ajar, swinging gently in the wind, and a faint glow emanated from within. Ethan frowned. Father Miguel always locked up after evening services, and that had been hours ago. The old priest was meticulous about such things, especially with the recent influx of drifters passing through town on their way to the silver mines in the mountains. Ethan changed direction and splashed through the muddy yard toward the church steps, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the church was dim except for 2 candles burning on the altar, their flames dancing shadows across the rough wooden pews. The smell of melted wax and damp wood filled his nostrils. At first he thought the building was empty, but then he saw her. A woman lay curled on the front pew, her dark hair spilling over the worn wood like ink on parchment. She wore a simple dress that had once been blue but was now faded and stained with travel, and her boots were caked with the same red mud that covered everything in New Mexico after a rain. A small carpetbag sat on the floor beside her, and even from where he stood, Ethan could see that she was shivering in her sleep. He approached quietly, his boots making soft sounds against the wooden floor. Up close, he could see that she was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with a delicate face that was pale with exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her lips were cracked as though she had been traveling for days without proper water. She muttered something in her sleep, a word he could not quite make out, and drew her knees tighter to her chest. Ethan stood there for a long moment, uncertain. He was not good with people, especially women. His life had been cattle and horses, and the endless work of keeping a ranch running with too few hands and too little money. But he could not leave her here, alone in the cold church with the rain coming down and the temperature dropping. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "Miss," he said softly, "Miss, you need to wake up now." She stirred but did not wake. He tried again, a little firmer this time, and her eyes flew open. They were gray, he noticed, the color of storm clouds, and for a moment they were wild with fear. She jerked upright, scrambling backward on the pew until her back hit the armrest. "Easy now," Ethan said, raising both hands to show he meant no harm. "I am not going to hurt you. I am Ethan Ashford. I have a ranch just outside of town. I found the church door open and came to investigate." The woman stared at him for a long moment, her breathing rapid and shallow. Then slowly, the fear in her eyes gave way to something else. Exhaustion, perhaps, or resignation. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked away. "I am sorry," she said, and her voice was hoarse as though she had been crying or had not had water in too long. "I know I should not be here. I will leave. In this weather," Ethan shook his head, "you will catch your death. Where are you staying?" The woman's silence told him everything he needed to know. She had nowhere to go, no family in town, no room at the boarding house. She was a stranger, alone and afraid, and something in Ethan's chest tightened at the thought. "What is your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then said, Hannah Owens." "Well, Miss Owens, you cannot stay here. Father Miguel will be back in the morning and questions will be asked. Do you have family in town? Friends?" Hannah shook her head, still not meeting his eyes. "I came here looking for work. I was told there might be opportunities in San Elizario, perhaps as a teacher or a seamstress. But when I arrived, I found that the teaching position had already been filled, and there is no work to be had. I spent my last money on the stage fare. I thought I would rest here for the night and figure out what to do in the morning." Ethan ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble on his jaw. This was not his problem. He should tell her where the boarding house was, give her a few coins if she needed them, and be on his way. But the words would not come. Instead, he found himself saying, "I know a woman in town, Mrs. Sarah Henderson. She runs a boarding house and sometimes takes in women who need a place to stay. Let me walk you there. She is a good woman, and she will help you find work if there is any to be had." Relief flooded Hannah's face, transforming it. She was pretty, Ethan realized with a start. Not in the painted, practiced way of saloon girls, but in a natural, unguarded way that made something in his chest ache. "Thank you," she said. "I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your kindness." She gathered her carpet bag, and together they left the church. Ethan pulled the door shut behind them and made a mental note to tell Father Miguel about the faulty lock in the morning. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, and the wind had died down, but the night air was cold and damp. Hannah stumbled on the slick steps, and Ethan caught her elbow to steady her. "Careful," he said. "The mud is treacherous." They walked through the dark streets of San Elizario in silence, the only sounds the patter of rain and the squelch of their boots in the mud. The town was small, barely 200 souls, with a main street lined with adobe buildings and false-fronted stores. Most of the windows were dark at this late hour, but lamplight glowed from the saloon, and Ethan could hear the faint sound of a piano playing Mrs. Henderson's boarding house sat at the far end of the main street, a two-story building with a wide porch and flower boxes under the windows. Even in the dark and the rain, it looked welcoming. Ethan led Hannah up the steps and knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened a crack and Mrs. Henderson's round face peered out. "Ethan Ashford, is that you?" she said, opening the door wider. "What are you doing out in this weather? And who is this?" "This is Miss Hannah Owens," Ethan said. "She is new to town and in need of a place to stay. I thought perhaps you might have a room for her." Mrs. Henderson's sharp eyes took in Hannah's bedraggled appearance, the carpet bag, the exhaustion written on every line of her face. Then she smiled, and it was warm and genuine. "Of course, dear. Come in, come in. You look half frozen. Let us get you warm and dry." Hannah looked at Ethan, and there was something in her eyes that he could not quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but something more. "Thank you," she said again. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not found me." "You are welcome," Ethan said, and meant it. He tipped his hat to Mrs. Henderson. "I will leave her in your capable hands, Sarah. Take care of her." "I always do," Mrs. Henderson said, already ushering Hannah inside. You get home before you catch your death, Ethan Ashford, and thank you for bringing her to me." Ethan nodded and turned to go, but as he reached the bottom step, he heard Hannah call his name. He turned back to find her standing in the doorway, framed by the warm light from inside. "Will I see you again?" she asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that made his heart skip. "San Elizario is a small town," he said. "I expect we will run into each other." She smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes, and Ethan found himself smiling back before he turned and walked away into the rain. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Ethan woke early, as he always did, and spent the morning mending fences that had been damaged in the wind. His ranch was small, only about 300 acres, but it was his, bought and paid for with years of hard work. He ran about 50 head of cattle and a dozen horses, and he employed 2 ranch hands, brothers named Tom and Jack Rivera, who lived in a bunkhouse on the property. As he worked, he found his thoughts drifting back to Hannah Owens. There had been something about her, something that lingered in his mind like the scent of rain on dry earth, the way she had looked at him with those storm-gray eyes. The vulnerability in her voice when she asked if she would see him again. Ethan shook his head, trying to clear it. He had no business thinking about a woman, especially one who was likely just passing through town. He had learned long ago that he was better off alone. People left, or they died, or they disappointed you. Cattle were simpler. They needed food and water and care, and in return they provided a living. That was enough. But as he rode into town that afternoon to pick up supplies at the general store, he found himself scanning the street for a glimpse of dark hair and a blue dress. He did not see her, and he told himself he was relieved. The general store was run by a man named Walter Green, a transplant from Boston who had come west for his health 10 years ago and stayed because he fell in love with a local woman. Walter's wife, Maria, was behind the counter when Ethan walked in, and she greeted him with a warm smile. "Ethan, good to see you. What can I get for you today?" He handed her his list, mostly flour and coffee and other staples, and while she gathered the items, he wandered through the aisles, looking at the goods on display. The store smelled of leather and tobacco and the faint sweetness of penny candy. He was examining a new bridle when the door opened and Mrs. Henderson walked in, followed by Hannah. Ethan's heart did an unexpected little jump in his chest. In the daylight, Hannah looked different. Her hair was clean and neatly pinned, and she wore a different dress, a simple brown calico that Mrs. Henderson must have loaned her. The exhaustion that had marked her face the night before had faded, though she still looked thin and pale, as though she had not been eating regularly for some time. Mrs. Henderson saw him first and waved. "Ethan, good afternoon. I was just showing Hannah around town, introducing her to folks." Hannah's eyes met his and she smiled. "Mr. Ashford, it is good to see you again." "Miss Owens," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks, thanks to your kindness." Mrs. Henderson looked between them with interest, and Ethan could practically see the wheels turning in her mind. Sarah Henderson was one of the biggest matchmakers in San Elizario, always trying to pair up single folks, and he knew that look in her eye. He cleared his throat and said, "I am glad to hear it. Have you had any luck finding work?" The smile faded from Hannah's face. "Not yet, Mrs. Henderson has been very kind, but it seems there really is not much call for teachers or seamstresses here. I am beginning to think I made a mistake coming to San Elizario." "Nonsense," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "There is always work for those who are willing to do it. In fact, I was just telling Hannah that I could use some help at the boarding house. I am not as young as I used to be, and keeping up with the cleaning and cooking for 6 boarders is getting to be too much. If she is willing to work hard, I can offer her room and board and a small wage." Hannah's face brightened. "I would be grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Henderson. I am a hard worker, I promise you. I am sure you are, dear." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand, then turned to Ethan. "And I was thinking, Ethan, you are always complaining about how you do not have time to keep up with everything at the ranch. Perhaps Hannah could help you with some of the lighter work. She could do your mending or help with the garden or cook meals for you and the hands. It would give her some extra money, and it would help you out." Ethan felt heat creep up the back of his neck. The last thing he needed was a woman at the ranch, especially one who made his heart do strange things just by smiling at him. But even as he opened his mouth to decline, he found himself thinking about the pile of mending that had been sitting in his bedroom for 3 months, and the fact that he and the Rivera brothers had been living on beans and hardtack for weeks because none of them could cook worth a damn. "I do not know," he said slowly. "It would not be proper, a woman coming out to the ranch alone." "Oh, for heaven's sake, Ethan, this is 1882, not the Dark Ages," Mrs. Henderson said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Hannah would come during the day and be back at the boarding house before dark. There is nothing improper about it. Besides, you have the Rivera brothers there. It is not as though she would be alone with you." Hannah was looking at him with those gray eyes, and there was hope in them and something else, something that made his chest feel tight. "I would very much appreciate the work, Mr. Ashford," she said quietly, "and I promise I would not be any trouble." Ethan hesitated a moment longer, then gave in. "All right, you can come out tomorrow morning. I will pay you fair wages for your work. Can you cook?" "Yes, sir. My mother taught me." "Good. That alone will make you worth your weight in gold. The Rivera brothers will be very happy to eat something other than my beans." Hannah smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest. He quickly paid Maria for his supplies and made his escape. But as he rode back to the ranch with his purchases loaded on his pack horse, he could not stop thinking about the way Hannah had looked at him. Like he was something more than just a lonely rancher scratching out a living in the New Mexico desert. Like he mattered. The next morning, Ethan was up before dawn, and he spent an hour cleaning the main house in a way he had not bothered to do in months. He swept the floors, washed the dishes that had been piling up, and even made his bed. Tom and Jack found this hilarious when they came in for breakfast and found him scrubbing the table. "You expecting the governor?" Tom asked with a grin. He was the older of the 2 brothers, 26 to Jack's 23, with dark hair and eyes and the kind of easy charm that made him popular with the ladies in town. "I hired someone to help with the cooking and mending," Ethan said, not looking up from his work. "She will be here this morning." "She?" Jack's eyebrows shot up. "You hired a woman. Ethan, are you feeling all right? Do not start," Ethan warned. "Mrs. Henderson suggested it, and we need the help. That is all there is to it." The brothers exchanged knowing looks but had the sense not to push further. They finished their coffee and headed out to start the day's work, leaving Ethan alone in the newly cleaned house. He paced for a while, then forced himself to go outside and work on mending the corral fence. He was elbow-deep in post holes when he heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Mrs. Henderson drove her small buckboard up to the house, with Hannah sitting beside her. Ethan wiped his hands on his trousers and went to greet them, helping Hannah down from the wagon seat. She wore the same brown dress and a bonnet to protect her face from the sun, and she carried a basket over one arm. "I brought some supplies to get started," she said. "Eggs and butter and some vegetables from Mrs. Henderson's garden. I thought I could make a proper breakfast for you and your men and then tackle the mending this afternoon." "That sounds fine," Ethan said. He turned to Mrs. Henderson. "Thank you for bringing her out, Sarah." "My pleasure. I will be back to fetch her before supper time, Mrs. Henderson gave Hannah an encouraging smile, then drove away, leaving them standing in the yard together. An awkward silence fell. Hannah looked around at the ranch, taking in the small house, the barn, the corrals with their horses, the distant line of cattle grazing on the scrubby grassland. "It is beautiful," she said finally. Ethan looked at his ranch, trying to see it through her eyes. It was not much, just a collection of weathered buildings and dusty land, but it was his. "It is home," he said simply. He showed her into the house, which suddenly seemed very small and shabby with her standing in it. But Hannah did not seem to notice. She set her basket on the table and looked around with an appraising eye. "You have a good cook stove?" she asked. "In here." He led her to the small kitchen at the back of the house. The stove was cast iron, old but functional, and it was one of the few things Ethan kept scrupulously clean because he knew what happened when grease built up. Hannah nodded approvingly. "This will do nicely." "If you will excuse me, Mr. Ashford, I will get started on breakfast. Would you mind calling your men? I would like to know how many I am cooking for." "There are 4 of us total," Ethan said. "Myself, Tom and Jack Rivera, and you, I suppose." "I suppose I am," Hannah said with a small smile. Ethan left her to her work and went to find the Rivera brothers. They were in the south pasture, checking on a cow that had been limping the day before. When he told them to come back to the house for breakfast, they looked at him like he had grown a second head. "Breakfast?" Jack said. "But we already ate." "That was coffee and stale biscuits," Ethan said. "This is real food." The brothers needed no more convincing. They followed him back to the house, and as they approached, the smell of frying bacon and fresh bread hit them. Tom actually groaned. "Is that what I think it is?" he asked. "Bacon," Ethan confirmed. "And eggs, unless I miss my guess." They trooped into the house to find the table set with plates and mugs and Hannah at the stove, frying eggs in bacon grease. She had found his mother's apron, the one that had been sitting in a drawer for 10 years, and she wore it over her dress, looking for all the world like she belonged there. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "You must be Tom and Jack. I am Hannah Owens. Please sit down. Breakfast will be ready in just a moment." The Rivera brothers sat, too stunned to speak. Ethan took his usual seat at the head of the table and watched as Hannah moved around the kitchen with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. She served them heaping plates of eggs and bacon and thick slices of bread toasted on the stovetop, and she poured fresh coffee from the pot. The first bite of food made Ethan close his eyes in appreciation. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the yolks still runny, seasoned with just the right amount of salt and pepper. The bacon was crispy, the bread was warm and slathered with butter. It was the best meal he had eaten in years. "Miss Owens," Tom said reverently, "if Ethan does not marry you, I will." Hannah laughed, a clear musical sound that filled the small kitchen. "I will keep that in mind, Mr. Rivera." "Just Tom, please, we are not fancy here. Then you must call me Hannah." They ate together, and the conversation flowed easily. Hannah asked questions about the ranch, about the cattle and the horses, and the Rivera brothers were happy to answer. Ethan found himself relaxing, enjoying the sound of voices and laughter in his home. It had been quiet for so long, just him and the hands talking about work, that he had forgotten what it was like to have someone else there, someone who brought warmth and light with them. After breakfast, Hannah shooed them all outside and set about cleaning up. Ethan tried to help, but she waved him away. "This is my job," she said firmly. "You have a ranch to run. Go run it." So he did, though he found it hard to concentrate on his work. He kept thinking about Hannah in his kitchen, wearing his mother's apron, laughing at Tom's jokes. It felt strange and wonderful all at once, like something had shifted in his world and he was not sure if he liked it or not. At midday, Hannah called them in for lunch, cold meat and cheese and fresh bread. And then in the afternoon while they worked, she tackled the pile of mending. When Mrs. Henderson came to collect her just before supper, Hannah presented Ethan with a stack of neatly mended shirts and trousers, every hole patched, every button sewn on securely. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked as she gathered her things. "Same time," Ethan agreed, and so it went. Hannah came every morning and stayed until early evening, cooking and cleaning and mending. The ranch had never been so well run or so comfortable. Ethan found himself looking forward to her arrival each day, to the sound of her voice and her laughter, to the way she made his house feel like a home. The weeks passed, and spring gave way to the heat of early summer. The grass turned brown, and the cattle moved to the higher pastures where there was still some green. Ethan hired Hannah to help with the branding, keeping tally of the calves as he and the Rivera brothers worked them. She sat on the corral fence in her bonnet and her worn dress, a notebook balanced on her knee, calling out numbers and descriptions while the dust rose around them. One evening in late June, Mrs. Henderson did not come to collect Hannah at the usual time. Ethan waited with her on the porch, watching the road, but there was no sign of the buckboard. "That is strange," Hannah said, frowning. "Mrs. Henderson is never late." Just as the sun was touching the horizon, they saw a rider coming fast up the road. It was Walter Green from the general store, and his face was grave. "Ethan, Hannah," he called as he reined in his horse. "Sarah Henderson took a bad fall this afternoon. She slipped on the stairs at the boarding house and hurt her leg. Doc Wilson says it is broken. She is going to be laid up for weeks." Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. "Is she all right? Can I see her? She is resting now. Doc gave her something for the pain. But she wanted me to tell you that she is sorry, but she will not be able to come fetch you for a while. She said you should stay here at the ranch until other arrangements can be made." Ethan and Hannah looked at each other. The impropriety of a single woman staying at a ranch with 3 men would set tongues wagging all over town. But what choice did they have? Hannah had no other way to get back to town, and it was too far to walk in the dark. "She can stay in my room," Ethan said. "I will bunk with Tom and Jack in the bunkhouse." Walter nodded, looking relieved that there was not going to be an argument. "I will let Sarah know. And I will try to arrange for someone else to come fetch Hannah in the morning." After Walter left, Hannah turned to Ethan with worry written all over her face. "This is not proper," she said. "People will talk." "Let them talk," Ethan said. "What else can we do? I am not sending you off into the dark alone, and you cannot stay in town if Mrs. Henderson needs you here to help her." Hannah bit her lip, then nodded. "You are right, of course. I am sorry for the imposition." "It is no imposition." That night, Ethan made up his bed with clean sheets and showed Hannah to his room. It was sparse, just a bed and a dresser and a chair, but it was clean and comfortable. She stood in the doorway, looking around, and he found himself seeing it through her eyes again. The room where he had slept alone for so many years, now being offered to her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not found me that night in the church." "You would have figured something out," Ethan said. "You are stronger than you think." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something electric and dangerous and wonderful. Ethan felt it all the way to his bones. Then Hannah looked away and the moment passed. "Good night, Mr. Ashford," she said. "Ethan," he corrected gently. "You call Tom and Jack by their first names. You should call me Ethan." "Good night, Ethan," she said, and there was something in the way she said his name that made his heart race. He retreated to the bunkhouse, where the Rivera brothers were already in their beds. They made room for him, and he lay down on the narrow cot, staring up at the ceiling in the dark. "You are in trouble, boss," Tom said from across the room. "What are you talking about?" Ethan asked, though he knew perfectly well. "You are falling for her. Anyone with eyes can see it." Ethan did not answer. What could he say? Tom was right. Somewhere between that first night in the church and now, he had fallen completely and hopelessly in love with Hannah Owens. The realization should have terrified him, but instead it felt like coming home after a long journey. Like everything in his life had been leading to this moment. The next morning, no one came from town to fetch Hannah, or the morning after that. It turned out that Mrs. Henderson's injury was more serious than they had first thought, and she would be laid up for at least 6 weeks. In the meantime, there was no one else who could spare the time to drive out to the ranch every day. "You might as well stay here," Ethan said on the third morning, when it became clear that the situation was not going to resolve itself quickly. "You can help Mrs. Henderson during the day and come back here at night. It makes more sense than trying to coordinate rides back and forth." Hannah agreed, though he could see the worry in her eyes about the impropriety of it all. But as the days turned into weeks, the arrangement became normal. Hannah moved into Ethan's room, and he stayed in the bunkhouse with the Rivera brothers. She cooked their meals and tended the vegetable garden she had planted behind the house. She helped with the lighter ranch work, feeding the chickens and collecting eggs, and sometimes she rode out with them to check on the cattle, sitting on the gentle mare Ethan had given her to use. They fell into a rhythm, a pattern of days that felt as natural as breathing. Ethan found himself talking to her in a way he had never talked to anyone, sharing stories from his childhood, his dreams for the ranch, his fears and hopes. Hannah listened, really listened, and she shared her own stories too. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her parents dying of fever when she was 18, about struggling to make a living as a seamstress in St. Louis before deciding to head west in search of a better life. "I was so scared when I got off that stage in San Elizario," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the desert. "I had spent my last penny on the fare, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And then you found me in the church, and you were so kind. You saved my life, Ethan." "I just walked you to a boarding house," he said, uncomfortable with the praise. "You did more than that. You gave me hope." She turned to look at him, her gray eyes serious. "I had been ready to give up. I thought I had made a terrible mistake, that I should have stayed in St. Louis and married Mr. Patterson like he wanted." Ethan felt a jolt of something that might have been jealousy. "Who is Mr. Patterson?" "A shopkeeper who wanted to marry me. He was 50 years old and already buried 2 wives. He offered me security, a home, a place in society. My friends all thought I was a fool to turn him down." "Why did you?" Ethan asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. "Because I did not love him. And I could not bear the thought of spending the rest of my life with someone I did not love, even if it meant I would be comfortable." She looked out at the desert, her expression distant. "My parents married for love. They were poor and life was hard, but they were happy. Truly happy. I wanted that too, I still do." Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "What if you found it?" he asked quietly. "What if you found someone to love?" Hannah turned back to him, and in the fading light her eyes were luminous. "I think I might have," she whispered. The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Ethan wanted to reach out and touch her, to pull her close and kiss her until neither of them could breathe. But he held back, afraid of moving too fast, of scaring her away. "Hannah," he said, and his voice came out rough. "I am not good with words. I am just a rancher and I do not have much to offer. But these past weeks with you here, they have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning looking forward to seeing you. I go to sleep every night thinking about you. I know it is fast, and I know it might seem crazy, but I think I am falling in love with you." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "It is not crazy," she said, "because I am falling in love with you too." Ethan reached out then, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were small and calloused from work, but they fit perfectly in his palm. They sat there on the porch, holding hands and watching the stars come out, and Ethan felt a peace settle over him that he had never known before. For the first time in his life, he was not alone. The next few weeks passed in a golden haze. Ethan and Hannah did not hide their feelings from the Rivera brothers or from the townspeople who occasionally stopped by the ranch. When Mrs. Henderson was finally well enough to receive visitors, Ethan and Hannah drove into town together to see her, and the older woman took one look at their joined hands and their glowing faces and burst into delighted laughter. "I knew it," she crowed from her chair in the parlor, her injured leg propped up on a stool. "The moment Ethan brought you to my door, I knew you two were meant for each other. When is the wedding?" Hannah blushed scarlet, but Ethan just grinned. "Soon," he said, "if Hannah will have me." "Are you asking?" Hannah said, looking at him with sparkling eyes. Ethan got down on one knee right there in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, still holding Hannah's hand. "Hannah Owens, will you marry me? I do not have much to offer except a small ranch and a lot of hard work, but I promise I will love you for the rest of my days. I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Hannah did not even hesitate. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes, Mrs." Henderson wiped her eyes with her handkerchief and declared that she would plan the finest wedding Santa Lazario had ever seen, broken leg or no broken leg, and she was as good as her word. 6 weeks later, in late August of 1882, Ethan and Hannah were married in the same little whitewashed church where he had found her sleeping all those months ago. The whole town turned out for the wedding. Hannah wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson and the other ladies of the town had sewn for her, made of white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan wore his best suit, which he had worn exactly twice before in his life, both times to funerals. Father Miguel performed the ceremony, and Tom Rivera stood up as Ethan's best man, while Mrs. Henderson, crutches and all, served as Hannah's matron of honor. As Ethan slipped the simple gold band onto Hannah's finger, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. This woman, this beautiful, brave, kind woman, was his wife. She had chosen him. Out of all the men in the world, she had chosen him. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife and told Ethan he could kiss his bride, Ethan cupped Hannah's face in his hands and kissed her with all the love and tenderness in his heart. The reception was held at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, with music and dancing and more food than Ethan had ever seen in one place. Hannah danced with him, with the Rivera brothers, with Walter Green and every other man in town who asked. But at the end of the night, it was Ethan who drove her home in the wagon, his wife sitting close beside him, her head on his shoulder. The ranch house had been cleaned and decorated while they were at the reception, thanks to the Rivera brothers. There were wildflowers in jars on the table and fresh sheets on the bed, and someone had even hung curtains in the bedroom window. Hannah stood in the doorway, looking around with tears in her eyes. "It is perfect," she whispered. That night, for the first time, Ethan slept in his own bed again, but he was not alone. Hannah was beside him, her head on his chest, her hair spread across the pillow like dark silk. He held her close and listened to her breathing slow and deepen as she fell asleep, and he thought that he had never been so happy in all his life. The months that followed were not always easy. Ranching was hard work, and there were days when the sun beat down mercilessly, and the cattle were stubborn and everything seemed to go wrong. But through it all, Hannah was there. She worked beside him, laughing when the chickens got loose and dried his sweat when he came in from the fields. She learned to ride well enough to help move cattle, though Ethan always made sure she stayed on the gentle mare and away from the more dangerous work. In the evenings, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun set, and talked about everything and nothing. In late October, Hannah told him she was pregnant. She said it casually over breakfast as though she were commenting on the weather. "I think we are going to have a baby. In the spring, I would guess." Ethan dropped his fork. "A baby," he repeated stupidly. Hannah laughed at his expression. "Yes, Ethan. A baby. That is what usually happens when two people love each other the way we do." Ethan got up from the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly that she squeaked in protest. "We are going to have a baby," he said, and he could not stop grinning. "I am going to be a father." "And I am going to be a mother," Hannah said, her eyes shining. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Ethan said, and he kissed her until they were both breathless. The Rivera brothers were thrilled at the news, and so was everyone in town. Mrs. Henderson immediately began knitting tiny clothes, and Maria Green from the general store gave Hannah a cradle that had been in her family for generations. As Hannah's belly grew, Ethan found himself becoming more protective. He did not want her doing heavy work, did not want her riding anymore, worried when she climbed the porch steps too quickly. "Ethan, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Hannah said with exasperation after he tried to carry her over a puddle in the yard. "I know, but what if something happens? What if you fall? What if the baby comes early?" Hannah took his face in her hands and looked him in the eye. "Nothing is going to happen. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am strong and I am healthy, and this baby is going to be just fine. But I need you to trust me and not treat me like I am fragile." Ethan tried to take her words to heart, but it was hard. He had lost so many people in his life, his parents, his friends, and the thought of losing Hannah or the baby terrified him. But she was right. She was strong, stronger than he had ever been, and he needed to trust her. In April of 1883, on a warm spring night when the air smelled of rain and desert flowers, Hannah went into labor. Ethan sent Tom racing to town to fetch the midwife, an experienced woman named Mrs. Ortega, who had delivered half the babies in San Elizario. Then he stayed by Hannah's side, holding her hand and wiping her face with a cool cloth while she labored. It was the longest night of Ethan's life. Hannah was in pain, and there was nothing he could do to help her except be there. She gripped his hand so tightly he thought she might break his fingers, and she cursed him more than once for putting her in this situation. But she also smiled at him between contractions, told him she loved him, and that gave him strength. Just before dawn, their son was born. He came into the world red-faced and screaming, with a full head of dark hair and the lungs of a bull. Mrs. Ortega cleaned him up and placed him in Hannah's arms, and Ethan looked down at his wife and his child and felt his heart swell to the point of bursting. "He is perfect," Hannah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Ethan asked, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby gripped it tightly, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a fierce, protective love that was unlike anything he had ever felt before. "I was thinking William," Hannah said. "After my father, William Ashford. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Ethan said. "Just like you." Just like him. William Ashford grew quickly, a healthy baby with his mother's gray eyes and his father's strong build. Hannah proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and loving, and Ethan discovered that fatherhood suited him. He loved coming in from the fields to find Hannah nursing William on the porch, loved the sound of the baby's gurgles and cries, even loved the sleepless nights when William would not settle and Ethan would walk him around the house, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until the baby finally dozed off. The ranch prospered. With Hannah's careful management of their finances and Ethan's hard work, they were able to expand their herd and buy more land. Tom and Jack Rivera became more like family than hired hands, and when Tom married a girl from town in 1884, Ethan and Hannah stood up with them at their wedding. In 1885, Hannah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She was as beautiful as her name, with dark curls and her mother's delicate features. William, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to hold her constantly. Ethan had to explain gently that Rose was too little, but William could sit next to his mother and look at the baby as much as he wanted. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. There were hard times, droughts that killed the grass and made the cattle thin, harsh winters when they lost stock to the cold, times when money was tight and they had to make do with less. But there were far more good times than bad. Birthdays and holidays, church socials and town dances, the simple pleasure of sitting on the porch in the evening with Hannah beside him, watching their children play in the yard. In 1888, their third child was born, another son they named Samuel after the man who had given Ethan his start in ranching. William was now 5 and took his role as big brother very seriously, while Rose, at 3, was more interested in the new baby's tiny toes than anything else. As the years passed, Ethan sometimes thought back to that rainy night in April of 1882 when he had found Hannah sleeping in the church. It seemed like a lifetime ago now, like it had happened to different people. He had been so lonely then, so convinced that he was meant to live his life alone. And Hannah had been so lost, so desperate and afraid. But they had found each other, and that chance meeting had changed both their lives forever. In the summer of 1890, Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. The whole town mourned her, but Ethan and Hannah felt her loss particularly keenly. She had been the one who had brought them together, who had given Hannah a place to stay and encouraged her relationship with Ethan. At the funeral, Hannah wept and told Ethan that she felt like she had lost a mother. "She knew how happy you made me," Hannah said, dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. "In those last few years, whenever I visited her, she always said that bringing us together was one of the best things she ever did." "She was right," Ethan said, holding her close. "Without her, I might never have found you." Life continued. William grew tall and strong, already showing signs of being an excellent horseman. Rose was clever and quick, learning to read before she was 5, and Samuel was fearless, always getting into mischief. Ethan and Hannah watched their children grow with pride and joy, and though they faced the usual challenges of raising a family, they did it together, side by side. In 1892, Hannah announced that she was pregnant again. Ethan was 42 by then, Hannah 32, and they had thought their family was complete. But the news filled them both with happiness. Their fourth child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in early 1893, and she completed their family perfectly. As the century drew to a close, the West was changing. The wild frontier that Ethan had known as a young man was becoming more settled, more civilized. Railroads connected distant towns, telegraphs brought news from across the country, and the days of cattle drives and gunfights were fading into legend. But on the Ashford ranch, life went on much as it always had. The cattle still needed tending, the fences still needed mending, and there was always work to be done. William, at 17 in 1900, was already running much of the ranch alongside his father. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind, and Ethan knew the ranch would be in good hands when he was ready to pass it on. Rose, at 15, had decided she wanted to be a teacher and was studying hard to pass the examination. Samuel, at 12, was still more interested in adventure than schoolwork, but he had a good heart and worked hard when he put his mind to it. And Grace, at 7, was the apple of everyone's eye, spoiled shamelessly by her older siblings and doted on by her parents. One evening in the spring of 1901, Ethan and Hannah sat on the porch as they had done countless times before, watching the sun set over the desert. Ethan was 51 now, his dark hair liberally streaked with gray, and Hannah was 41, with fine lines around her eyes that only made her more beautiful in his opinion. They had been married for nearly 19 years, and Ethan loved her more with each passing day. "Do you ever think about that night?" Hannah asked suddenly. "The night you found me in the church, all the time," Ethan admitted. "I think about how close I came to just walking past. What if I had not stopped? What if I had decided it was not my business?" "But you did stop," Hannah said, squeezing his hand. "You stopped, and you were kind to a stranger who had nothing to offer you. You saved me, Ethan." "You saved me too," he said. "I was so lonely before you came." "I did not even realize how lonely I was until you were there, and suddenly I could not imagine my life without you." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the desert settling down for the night. From inside the house, they could hear their children laughing at something, and Ethan felt a deep contentment wash over him. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you from almost the first moment I saw you, and I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Hannah said. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." They sat there as the stars came out, one by one, painting the sky with light. The ranch house glowed warm and welcoming behind them, full of the family they had built together. And Ethan thought that this, right here, was what happiness looked like. Not wealth or fame or adventure, but a good woman by his side, healthy children in his home, and the satisfaction of a life well lived. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. In 1903, William married a local girl named Elizabeth, and they moved into a small house on the far edge of the ranch property. The following year, Elizabeth gave birth to Ethan and Hannah's first grandchild, a boy they named Ethan after his grandfather. Holding his namesake in his arms for the first time, Ethan felt the circle of life continuing, the legacy passing from one generation to the next. Rose achieved her dream and became a teacher at the school in San Elizario, beloved by her students for her patience and kindness. Samuel, after giving his parents a few gray hairs with his wild ways, settled down and became an excellent ranch hand, eventually taking over more and more of the day-to-day operations as Ethan slowed down. Grace, their youngest, grew into a beautiful and spirited young woman. She had inherited her mother's gray eyes and her father's determination, and she had the whole town wrapped around her little finger. When she announced in 1908 that she wanted to go to college in Las Cruces to study nursing, Ethan was proud even though the thought of her leaving made his heart ache. As Ethan entered his 60s, he began to step back from the hardest ranch work, leaving it to Samuel and William and the hands they employed. He spent more time with Hannah, helping her in the garden, reading in the evenings, making up for all the time they had spent working in the early years. They took trips into town more often, visiting with old friends, attending church on Sundays, becoming the kind of settled older couple they had once thought they would never be. In 1910, Ethan turned 60, and Hannah planned a surprise party for him at the ranch. All their children came, with their spouses and children, and half the town showed up as well. As Ethan looked around at the crowd of people, at the children running and playing, at the tables groaning under the weight of food, at Hannah beaming at him from across the yard, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. He stood up to give a speech, something he had never been comfortable with, but the occasion seemed to demand it. The crowd quieted, and he looked around at all the faces looking back at him, faces he knew and loved. "I am not much for speeches," he started, and there was a ripple of laughter. "But I want to say thank you. Thank you for coming here today, for being part of my life, for making this ranch and this town feel like home. Most of all, I want to thank my wife, Hannah. 28 years ago, I found her sleeping in a church on a rainy night. I woke her gently and walked her home, and it was the best decision I ever made. She has given me everything, a family, a home, a purpose. She turned a lonely rancher into the luckiest man alive. Hannah, I love you more than words can say." There was not a dry eye in the place, including Hannah's. She crossed the yard to him, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close while their family and friends applauded. It was a perfect moment, one that Ethan knew he would remember for the rest of his life. The years after that were gentle and sweet. Ethan and Hannah became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family, with grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren filling the ranch with noise and laughter. They watched their children succeed and struggle, offering advice when asked and support always. They attended weddings and christenings, celebrated holidays and birthdays, and mourned the passing of old friends. In 1918, when the world was at war and the news from Europe was grim, Ethan and Hannah sat on their porch and thanked God that their children and grandchildren were safe and healthy. Samuel's oldest son had wanted to enlist, but he was needed on the ranch, and Samuel had convinced him to stay. It was a difficult decision, but Ethan supported it. The ranch needed young men to keep it running, and he could not bear the thought of losing any of his family to the horror overseas. As Ethan moved into his 70s, his health began to fail. Nothing serious, just the aches and pains of old age, the slowing down that came naturally with the years. But he still woke up every morning grateful for another day, another chance to see the sun rise over the desert, another opportunity to hold Hannah's hand. On a warm evening in May of 1925, Ethan and Hannah sat on their porch, watching the sun set just as they had done thousands of times before. Ethan was 75 now, Hannah 65, and they had been married for 43 years. The ranch had long since passed to William and Samuel, though Ethan still liked to go out and check on the cattle occasionally, just to feel useful. "You have any regrets?" Hannah asked him. It was a question she had asked before, usually on their anniversary or on quiet evenings like this. "Not a one," Ethan said, and he meant it. "My only regret is that we did not have more time together. 100 years would not be enough." "We have been blessed," Hannah said. "We have had a good life, a good family. We have loved and been loved. What more could anyone ask for?" "Nothing," Ethan agreed. "Absolutely nothing." They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Somewhere in the house, they could hear their great-grandchildren playing, their voices high and sweet. The desert wind blew gently, carrying the scent of sage and dust and home. "I love you," Hannah said. "I have loved you from that very first night, when you woke me so gently in the church and offered to help a stranger. You have been the best husband, the best father, the best man I have ever known." "And you," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, "have been my everything. My wife, my partner, my best friend. You took a lonely rancher and gave him a life worth living. I will love you forever, Hannah." in this life and whatever comes after. They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands and counting their blessings. The ranch that had started as a small, struggling operation had grown and prospered, providing a good living for 2 generations and likely to do so for many more. Their children had all found happiness and success in their own ways. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren were healthy and thriving. And through it all, Ethan and Hannah had been there for each other, partners in every sense of the word. As the years continued to roll by, Ethan and Hannah slowed down but never stopped living. They took joy in the small things, the morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, the letters from their children and grandchildren scattered across the country, the simple pleasure of working in the garden together. They had built something lasting, not just in the ranch and the family, but in the love they shared, a love that had started on a rainy night in a small church and had grown to encompass their entire world. In the spring of 1927, Ethan fell ill with pneumonia. He was 77, and though the doctor did his best, they all knew that at his age, recovery would be difficult. Hannah rarely left his bedside, holding his hand and talking to him even when he was too weak to respond. Their children came to say goodbye, though none of them wanted to believe that the strong, steady man who had been the foundation of their family could really be leaving them. But Ethan was ready. He had lived a long, full life, had loved and been loved, had built something lasting. On a quiet morning in April, with Hannah beside him and the sun streaming through the window, Ethan Ashford closed his eyes for the last time, a peaceful smile on his lips. Hannah grieved him deeply, as did everyone who had known him. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire town of San Elizario and the surrounding ranches. People came from as far away as El Paso to pay their respects to a man who had been a pillar of the community for over 40 years. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved so much. Hannah lived for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, saying that she had had her great love and did not need another. She spent her days tending her garden, playing with her great-grandchildren, and visiting Ethan's grave on the hill. She told anyone who would listen the story of how they had met, how he had found her sleeping in a church and changed her life forever. On a spring morning in 1935, Hannah Ashford passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 75. Her children laid her to rest beside Ethan on the hill, their graves side by side just as they had been in life. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates and a single inscription that William had chosen, together forever. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, a living testament to the love and hard work of Ethan and Hannah Ashford. Their descendants still told the story of how their great-great-grandparents had met, how a lonely rancher had found a woman sleeping in his church, woke her gently, and walked her home. It had been the beginning of a love story that had lasted a lifetime and beyond, a love that had built a family and a legacy that would endure for generations to come. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the New Mexico desert and the wind whispered through the sage, some said you could still feel their presence on that hill. 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and had loved each other completely, a love that not even death could diminish. They had found their happily ever after, not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the steady accumulation of days spent together, in kindness and patience and the deep abiding love that comes from truly knowing another person's heart. The Ashford Ranch remained in the family for over a century, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Ethan and Hannah had built. The old ranch house was eventually modernized but never torn down, and visitors could still see the porch where Ethan and Hannah had spent so many evenings together, still feel the warmth and love that had soaked into the very walls of the place. And in the church in San Elizario, the same little whitewashed building where it had all begun, there was a small plaque on the front pew, placed there by the Ashford family in memory of the night that had changed everything. It reads simply, "In memory of Ethan and Hannah Ashford, who found love in the most unexpected place and built a life that blessed all who knew them. Their story became part of the town's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend." But to those who had known them, who had seen the way Ethan looked at Hannah even after 40 years of marriage, who had witnessed Hannah's devotion to Ethan until his last breath, it was not legend. It was simply the truth. They had loved each other completely, wholly, and eternally, and that love had transformed not just their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. In the end, theirs was a simple story. A lonely rancher found a woman sleeping in his church, woke her gently, and walked her home. From that small act of kindness grew a love that would span decades, produce a family that would number in the hundreds, and create a legacy that would endure long after both of them had gone. It was a reminder that the greatest love stories are not always the ones filled with drama and grand gestures, but the quiet ones, the steady ones, the ones built on kindness and patience and the daily choice to love someone with your whole heart. And if you visited San Elizario even now, and climbed the hill where Ethan and Hannah lay side by side, you might feel it too. The enduring power of a love that had started with a gentle touch and a kind word, and had grown into something beautiful and lasting and true. A love that proved that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them, and that a single moment of compassion can change everything. The sun still rises over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The ranch still stands, a testament to hard work and dedication. And somewhere in the fabric of that place, woven into the very essence of the land, is the love story of Ethan and Hannah Ashford, a reminder that true love endures, that kindness matters, and that the simple act of helping a stranger can lead to the greatest adventure of all.